I might have just been hyperventilating for all I know, but it was an experience of energy moving through my body from the base all the way up through the top of my head that kind of left me frozen and rocking in this energy. And it was something that was quite palpable. You couldn't ignore it. Something was happening.
Welcome, friends. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Paul Selig. Paul is considered one of the foremost contributors to the field of channeled literature working in the world today. He was born in New York City, attended New York University, and received his master's degree from Yale. And then in 1987, a spiritual experience left him clairvoyant. And we're going to hear more about that. 13 channeled texts so far, I'm going to add, have been written through Paul. He describes his work as the work of a spoken stenographer. So we're going to hear more about what that means. And he's working for a group of non-human guides. In 2024, the channeled book, A World Made New, was published. And now in 2026, a new book. It's called Divine Union, The Essential Path to Oneness. Paul, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, we have to start with the event in 1987 from which you emerged as a clairvoyant. What happened?
I was about 4 months sober, I think, actually. I'd heard a voice after I'd started praying for the first time a few months before that sort of told me how to get my act together. And I listened to the voice, which was the first voice. And I was beginning to think for the first time that maybe there was something that one might refer to as God. I'd been raised pretty much an atheist. And I heard that there was this thing happening called the harmonic convergence, and people were going to be waking up. And nowadays, it seems like there's some celestial event every 5 days, and I don't put a lot of stock in it. But at that time, I thought, well, if there is a God and there is this thing happening and you ask to be woken up, why would it want to say no? So I went up to the roof of the building that I lived in New York City, the night before this purported event. And I had a crystal and I had a mantra. Somebody had given me one of each. I thought you needed those things to wake up. And I had an experience that people later said sounded like a spontaneous kundalini awakening. I might have just been hyperventilating for all I know, but it was an experience of energy moving through my body from the base all the way up through the top of my head that kind of left me frozen and rocking in this energy. And it was something that was quite palpable. You couldn't ignore it. Something was happening. I didn't know about breath work. I didn't even know what kundalini was. The mantra, it turned out, was a kundalini mantra, but I didn't know what that meant. And after that happened, I started seeing little lights around people like fireflies. That was the beginning of the clairvoyance. I think, given what I had come from, I needed something that was palpable and discernible and would override my own skepticism. And I think that experience did that for me because it was a tangible experience of energy. And that was the beginning of it. It was just little lights like fireflies that would pop up around people. And I, was feeling energy and seeing energy, and I didn't know what to make of any of it, really. I wasn't looking to get into this stuff. But that was the beginning.
What do you make of these little fireflies that you saw around people?
I never figured it out. I mean, they're spirit. But when I taught college, and I did that for 25 years, they used to show up around my students when they had a bright idea, like the little light bulbs in a cartoon, the ideal light bulb. And I learned to say, what did you use? You just had an idea. And they go, how did you know? But I think that there's spirit. I don't seek them out. They show up when they show up, usually white, sometimes a beautiful blue. The ones that appear over the crown center, about 6, 8 inches above the crown, I think may be what people call the high self or the true self. I was doing an event once and they were popping like Polaroid light bulbs over everybody's head when they were sort of getting attuned and they were kind of waking up to a new potential. It's not the way that I work anymore. That was just an open door. It showed me that there was something more that my senses could perceive beyond what I had believed was so. My psychic work now is quite different.
Yeah, let's hear more about that. I was reading
Mhm,
about your story, and it sounds like there
mhm.
was an acceleration of your work that happened quite dramatically, starting from when you were 48 years old, that then led into the creation of this series of channeled texts.
There were two accelerations. The first one was when I was around 30 years old, maybe 5 years after that first experience, and I studied a form of energy healing. And I found I was volunteering at a center for people that were living with life-challenging illness at the time. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York City. I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I began to hear things for them, which they would then verify. And I could feel the energy as it would leave the body, and I began to feel what was going on in the body, which I really didn't have any context for. So I was opening up as a clairsentient and a clairaudient without really understanding or knowing what those things were, but they were certainly a byproduct of the training I had undertaken. I was studying with an old Irish lady, Ethel Lombardi, who had been one of the first Reiki masters in the US, I think one of the first 13 at the time, and she was teaching her own modality. At 48, I've been doing a group in my apartment to sit in the energy, and I was hearing from these guides, but I was mostly interested in the energy that would come through when they instructed. And they weren't lecturing, they were just bringing through coordinates and ways to work with energy. And I liked being in the energy in a group because, again, it was palpable. You couldn't fake it. It was all happening. We were all feeling it at the same time. When I was 48, the guides I work with said, well, you need you to stop smoking cigarettes. I was a 4 pack a day guy. And just like when I quit drinking, my psychic abilities began. When I quit smoking, everything changed. And I began taking dictation in lecture form. All I knew at the time was that I was talking more and for longer. I wasn't all that interested in the content. I was interested in the energy because, who was I and what was coming out of my mouth didn't matter nearly as much as this really concrete, energetic vibration that would fill the room and then work on the bodies of the people that were there when I sat and tuned in. So that was the beginning, and then that's when the books began. Once I became willing to transcribe the lectures, record and transcribe, I hadn't been willing to do that because I didn't like to hear myself channel, and I still don't really. But a medium found out that I was not recording and was rather incensed and said, "You have to do this," and I did. And I had been a writer with the worst case of writer's block of anybody I've ever known. And I was chairing a master's program in writing at the time. It was a terrible, terrible feeling. But I found when I began to type these transcripts up, I was typing up these perfectly formed lectures that required no editing. And after I began to do that for maybe 2 months, the guides announced that they had a book to write, and if I would take 2 weeks, they would deliver it. And that was the first book, which was called I Am the Word, which was dictated in 2009, published in 2010.
What does it feel like for you when the guides are dictating through you?
It's different now than it was. When it first started, I felt like somebody had their lips pressed against my forehead, and the vibration of the words would come here, and then I would form them at my mouth, and I got into this pattern of whispering and repeating everything. It was like I was on a loop. It was like reading ticker tape, phrase after phrase. I would just hear the phrase. I wouldn't know where the phrase was going, where the sentence was going, and certainly not the lecture or the paragraph, because I was only hearing it parsed. The people in the room would hear the whole thing and be able to put it together. And now that I'm channeling directly where the energy just flows through me, It's kind of like being what I imagine a woodwind instrument might be like. Something is playing you. You're being played through. The sound is coming out. It's no longer phrase, phrase, phrase. It's now the words are just flowing and flushing through and out of me. And it's kind of a constant thing. When I worked as whispering and repeating, which was how I did the first 12 books, I think, I could retain a little bit because there was this sort of half-second delay where I could inquire about the teaching, and that's not there anymore. So I retain next to nothing about what's come through me during the dictation. Afterwards, the first time I read the books that come through me now is when I do the audiobooks. I don't remember a whole lot of them. I might remember the larger gestures. But it's like being played. I've called myself a radio, and when I'm channeling, I'm tuned into a station, which I think of as the guides, and they're playing through me. And when I read for people, which is a bit different, I'm turned into the person or the people that person asks about, and then I can hear them at a higher level.
Why do you think, Paul, this has been your life assignment? Why were you chosen for this? 4 packs of cigarettes a day. I mean, the whole thing is a little unlikely from a
Yeah,
certain
it's all
perspective.
unlikely. Oh, everything. I was the last person that I would have suspected. When I look back, though, at my original writing when I was a bratty young playwright in my youth, the work that I was writing was all about transcendence. I just didn't understand what that meant. I knew that it was something that I was seeking. Um, I had an experience at the time, in my mid 20s, where I was waking up. I'd had this master's degree. I had writer's block. I was barely able to feed myself. Everybody that I knew seemed to be dying of AIDS all around me. It was kind of a perfect storm. If somebody hadn't taken me in and put me in a guest room, I probably would have been homeless at that time. And in a strange way, it was a bit of a perfect storm. And I was so willing at that time, I think, because perhaps I had to, or because I had enough of an experience when I first heard that voice, when I started to pray, or when I had the experience on the roof, that gave me something tangible. I was actually extremely devoted in a lot of ways in those early years when I was studying healing and I was working. And, what I felt at the time was, if there is a God or something like a God, which I hadn't been party to. My father was a Holocaust survivor. My mother had been raped by a minister. There was no religion in the home that I grew up in at all, at all. I didn't realize that my mother had had a history with that until it was close to her death, and she explained the story. But I don't know where I was going with this. I think the fact that I had a willingness at that time that was really full, and a hunger that I hadn't named was a big deal. And what I was going to say was, to go from a planet where there is no such thing as God or source or whatever you want to call it to one in which there is mind bending, to say the least. It was like a whole other planet. And it did make everything else pale in comparison. There was a sense of vocation. I was not looking to have a career as a channeler. That happened once the books started coming through me. The last thing I think I ever would have thought of, I was actually someone that didn't really believe all that much in channeling. I'd read most of a Seth book when I was a grad student. Somebody had given it to me or I'd found it in a bin, and I thought it was really interesting, but I didn't finish it. But I wasn't looking for this, and I've never been a very good New Ager. So I don't know beyond that. My guides have said, well, I've worked with them before. I've been prepared for this. I've got a little bit of past life information where I was doing work in the Renaissance, believe it or not, that was party to this. And it's the only name I've ever been given. And it was when I was on jury duty and panicking because every time I went to the court, I would melt down. And they finally gave me a name. I said, why is this happening? They gave me a name. I said, look it up. This is pre-internet. I found an encyclopedia. I looked up the name, and it was somebody who'd been a philosopher who'd been on trial for heresy, and I went, oh, it's the same teaching, it seems like. So who knows? That's about it.
One of the things that I was surprised by is that you're very clear. I'm not a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
I'm taking dictation and I'm sharing what I hear. And so I take from that that the teachers are the guides
Mhm.
and you're the, as you said, the radio station that's receiving
Mhm.
them. And at first I thought, come on, Paul,
Yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
you're listening to all this stuff. It's coming through you, own the seat of being the person who understands this material and can teach on it. And just you and I are getting to know each other. I was talking to my wife about this, and she herself does spiritual healing work and trains people in
Mhm.
depth to become spiritual healers. And she said, how wonderful, Tami, that you're talking to someone who has this capacity, who doesn't have to claim it. Like, what a humility that is. It's a good thing. Whereas I
Mhm.
was like, come on, he should step into being able to teach on this material himself.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
my question underneath it is, how do you make sense, if you will, of the vibration that you're at and that you're able to communicate from as Paul Selig, the human,
Mhm.
and what comes through you and the
Mhm.
distance between that?
I don't know that I would describe it as a distance. I would think of it more as if I'm operating most of my life in a field of information. It's the common field. We all share this information. And it's a broadcast. And I won't pretend that I haven't been affected by this work and that I can't try to explain the work and be successful at it. And that is a form of teaching. But I am not claiming myself as ascended or having all the answers because I'm still on my own path. Now, the gap really is as subtle as when you change the dial on a radio. You know, it's minute, and suddenly there's something else that's available. And in my case, it's always present. When I first started channeling, and I was doing groups early on, I was still studying with a teacher who was, what is this guy doing with his own work? I was doing this stuff and I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to hear, that people would show up for an event. And it was like I had a tin can up to my ear on a string, and I kept hoping somebody else would speak into the other side. And finally, one night, the guide said, do we have permission to merge? And from that day on, it's always been present. It's always been that easy to shift, to shift focus. So I think of it as a shift of focus. I will say, though, that if I understand the guide's teaching, there is an aspect of all of us that is at this level of alignment. And the teachings that they bring forth are all about how we align at that level. I was, when I was younger, in my 30s, caught up in the specialness of this stuff and the need to be seen as the one doing this. And that's a bit of a trap. And the guides in an early lecture, when I first started doing workshops, and there was some man who said, "Oh, I understand this teaching. We are all the Christ." And the guides corrected him and says, "No, you don't become the Christ. The Christ becomes you," which is a very different teaching. The need for the egoic structure, the personality self, to claim its self importance through this, I think is something of a trap. And I've experienced it. I don't like it. And it's not that I am denigrating my own role in this or lessening it. I understand myself in some ways as a student who sits in the front row, and I get to ask questions because I'm in the flow and they'll let me. I used to say when I was channeling, it was like climbing into the backseat of a car with a magazine and letting somebody else drive. But if I heard something that I found contrary to all of my beliefs or that I couldn't get behind, I was known to lean over and say, "What the hell was that?" And for the most part, if they wanted to continue their lecture, they had to answer it in some way.
Now, you mentioned that you yourself can shift.
Mhm.
You can shift to
Yeah.
this different vibration. How do
Mhm.
you shift?
Intention, really. I mean, when I was questioning all this at one point in my life, And I was being mentored by a wonderful old psychic in Rhode Island, working class gal. And she said, "Oh, you think it's you? Try to channel right now." And you can't. It's either happening or it's not. It's like being in the shower. You're either under the spigot getting wet or it's not happening. So when I show up for something, I'm giving permission to be available to it, and I'm trusting that whoever's coming through me is going to show up at the appointed time, because I think if they didn't, I wouldn't be able to do it again. I've known a couple of channels who've shown up and they couldn't hear a damn thing. That was it. They were not working anymore, at least not in the ways that they had been. When I read for people, which is a different thing, I don't talk to dead people much. When I get people that are crossed, I usually get them right before they cross, often when they're transit. It's really very interesting. But I've been called, or maybe I've called myself a medium for the living. So as long as somebody still has a body, I can usually tune in and hear some aspect of them or embody them. There's a whole physical component to what I do. I've been told, and I guess it's been filmed at this point, that when I'm channeling the guides, my eyes turn a very pale, pale blue. And I have hazel eyes, they're darker. When I step into other people, I'll often take on their mannerisms or their expressions. And the people that I haven't met before, I've been filmed doing it with people, once with a guy with cerebral palsy that I didn't know that he had it, and I totally somatized the whole thing. It's quite curious. But when I'm doing that, I'm just tuning in through the name of the person. It's a form of psychometry, I guess, John Smith, and it's your John Smith. So I go to John through you, and then I become as John Smith, and then I can hear. And if you're having problems with John Smith, I can flip back and forth between the two of you. It's like an old telephone operator with those little plug-in cords. I'm just plugged in different ways. And in some ways, I guess, monitoring or relaying the conversations that I'm hearing.
All right. You and I, as I said, are just getting to know each other, and I'm glad that our paths are now intersecting in this way. Divine Union is the first book of yours that I've read, the new book. And
Yeah.
as I was reading the book, I experienced being on a different, I don't know what else to call it, different frequency.
Yeah.
And as the guides are describing the upper room, this place where we're free from fear and a sense of
Mhm.
separation, I could feel that. I was in this atmosphere. But then
Yeah.
I shut the book and I
Mhm.
went back, and I wasn't sure if I had really been changed in any kind of lasting way, or if I just went someplace, like I
Mhm.
went on a journey and then I came back to where I was. And
Mhm.
so my question is, how do you see being immersed in the vibration that these guides are bringing through you? How do you see that changing people in an
Mhm.
enduring way versus like a place we visit and then we come back?
That's a good question. The guides work with attunements, and they call the attunements claims of truth. And they've been doing that since the beginning, since before I was channeling books. They brought through these spoken, I don't know what you would call them, incantations, for lack of a better word, that were physically palpable. And they say once you're attuned, you've been attuned, you're holding that seed or the new idea in the energetic field or in consciousness. How one aligns to those things is the process. I don't think that this is magic or abracadabra. I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't trust somebody waving a crystal over my head and saying, "You're done, you're finished. There's nothing to process." My experience with this is that I have these high experiences when I'm channeling the energy, and then I get to go through a rather uncomfortable process of clearing what has stood in the way of that realization or that knowing. It's not all rainbows and unicorns in this work at all. I wish it were sometimes, and I wish the guides that I work with were just telling people how to make more money and get a better apartment. I'd be doing other kinds of work, but that's not the teaching. I think it's a mystical teaching. Do I carry the energy of the teachings beyond the lecture? I would say yes, I do, and no, I don't, because my ordinary experience is still colored by all of the associations I have in the common field. So, the guides that I work with, when they would send people home after a workshop, would sometimes say things like, so you're going to go home and the dishes that you left in the sink are still there, as is the unpaid bill. And how do you attend to these things with this higher level of awareness, or do you just go back to what you have? The guides have said, we're living in a museum, really, of surrounded by things that were named by those who came before us, and the legacy of ideas and morality and tenets that others have ascribed. And we're always in conversation with these things, whether or not we know it, because we expect them to be there. The alignment in the upper room, the guides say this about the upper room, which I found interesting, because people sometimes say, how do I stay there? And I go, I don't know. I do understand what they say, though, is that there is a part of us that is always there, always there, and accessing that part of us and learning how to align at that level is part of the process. One of the simple ways that one can maintain that, I understand, is not to take actions based in fear. They say the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same. And they also say something which is really difficult, which is who you put in darkness, or what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness, which is a teaching of energetic alignment. It's just really cause and effect. Or what you damn damns you back, or what you bless blesses you in return. And blessing and damning aren't, I think, what we think they are. Damning something is saying God cannot be there or within that human being or in that situation. They've said that the denial of the divine is the big problem in all its forms. That's what we're really dealing with. Everything else is a symptom of that. And so when we go to this level of vibration, which you say you had a taste of, the upper room, we're experiencing what it's like to be there. When I was in my late 20s, I had an experience after a very dark night of the soul where I felt my heart on fire and this burning flame, and everybody was where they needed to be. It was a 3-day experience of grace, nothing like it ever in my life before, really, or since. And I thought, wow, this is it, I've arrived. And then it was gone. But what I was given was an understanding that it was there, and that there's a part of me that is there and remembers that. And that memory of those things is part of what I think propels us forward. It's instilled in the vibration. We just have to kind of align to it yet again.
What I'd like to hear more about is the clearing process. And
Mm.
if you would be willing to share in your own life how that's worked and what you've learned about it.
I'll try to do it from my own life, because I don't always see the
You're the
changes.
student in the front row seat, you've been
Yeah, I
listening.
know. But I show up all the time for the work. So I don't necessarily have the experience. I don't have the experience that you had as a reader of the book from the outside, because the words came through me, which is actually more confounding. If you were the channel for this stuff, I could say, well, I agree with this or I don't, and put it away or not. But I live with this stuff in a very different way. My abilities through doing this work have shifted enormously. How I operate sort of spiritually and psychically have been altered. The process of clearing stuff is usually, here's the idea. If I was living in a really dark room in my youth, and I was, truthfully, it was a pretty dark experience, vibrant in some ways, but dark. The process of moving into a light room, I think, is a process that one undergoes. Because when what you're used to is sort of being in a cave, the idea of being flooded with light is fairly terrifying. It makes you want to retreat even farther back. So my steps forward, as they have come in different ways. I'm living a life now that I would not have imagined ever, 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 not possible in my worldview. And I am continuing to have an experience of this work, which at times confounds me a little bit, and at times gives me great comfort. But the process of clearing really isn't a lot different than pouring clean water into a glass with silt at the bottom. It rises to the surface on its way out, and you get to see it on its way out. You get to say, okay, here's that thing, or here's what I believe, or here's how I'm frightened, and here's what I do with that fear. I would be lying to say if I felt like I was done, I had arrived. I don't feel that. And I'm somewhat suspicious personally of people who announce themselves as enlightened. My feeling is that people that probably are don't need to announce it. They're busy doing whatever their work happens to be. And maybe that's my fear of claiming something. It's, as you suggested, it's possible. But how I have left the idea of who I was and moved into something, it's less about claiming a different identity in the world. It's claiming a different experience of self in the world. That's the best way I can do it. It's presence in being. And what I think is moved is the process of obstruction, the things that stand in the way on the path that we walk. And I think those things get thrown into our path when we're on the path in order to attend to them. I don't think this is spiritual bypassing. I think you can live beyond certain things, but if it's mine, my creation, or my karma, if you want to say that, or my fear, I'm going to probably have to attend to it in one fashion or another in order for it to shift. And the claims of truth or the attunements can really support this in productive ways.
You've mentioned not operating from fear, that when we act
Mhm.
from fear, that brings
Mhm. Yeah.
more fear into our life. What do you do, and what are the guide's instructions for when we feel afraid and we're not quite sure what else to do except act from fear because we're afraid?
Yeah, I still get scared and I still act on it and I'm punished for doing it, mostly by the outcome of my choices. When I do it, the action of fear is to claim more fear. They say, look at the choices you've made because you were afraid and see what it got you. And more than likely, it will be more of the same. Now, yes, I'm going to go to them for this one because I don't know that I want to try to answer it as Paul. The idea that you're afraid is what you must attend to in the evidence of fear. And the evidence of fear that you have accrued is usually based on historical data, what one should be afraid of. To see a panther on the road, to see a panther on the road and to get out of the road and avoid the panther is not necessarily an act of fear, is not necessarily an act of fear. To shun your neighbor, because you heard terrible things about her would be an act of fear. And to understand yourself as being reliant on fear to negotiate your landscape, utilizing it as a compass of one kind or another, would in most ways just suggest that you are enabling fear to be your director. When fear is your director, you compound the evidence of fear and it becomes dense. The density of the field that you all operate in, call it what you wish, we will say the common field, informed by fear, is the world that you have been navigating. Until you begin, underline the word begin, to lift beyond the common field and the residual affect of past fear, you will be unable to create in a higher way because fear in its own way serves to pollute the field. The upper room does not hold this level of pollution. We invite you there so that you may align to your own potential, underline potential at this level. There is a difference between realizing one's potential and then honoring that potential and acting upon it and relying upon the potential to direct you, than embodying it in fullness because you've decided that you can or you should. Those that have that opportunity, I have ascended and I know who I am at this level, perhaps are blessed or perhaps are deciding for themselves what they should be based on an idea of separation. When one releases the need, underline the word need, to be afraid for its own protection, when one decides that one can move beyond that, one begins to elect, underline that word, different choices. There is always another opportunity. If in the moment you're feeling frightened, and underline the word feeling because that is what you're experiencing, you can make a choice to align to something other or higher or different. I am word through the fear that I experience is claiming the action of the divine upon the vibration of the fear and also the historical data that that fear has accrued, why you should be afraid. As long as you think you should be afraid, you will enact fear. You may fight your neighbor, you may fight a country, and all of these ideas are generally born in a belief in separation, which is indeed the action of fear, period, and they're saying period.
What is interesting to me about that, several things, and thank you, guides, for coming through here in our conversation, so just give a thank you, is this underlining of the word elect and
Mhm.
choose.
Yeah.
And as I got to the end of reading Divine Union, there
Mhm.
was this invitation as the
Mhm.
reader to say yes. You can say yes, make this choice. Willingness is an action. I thought that was
Mhm.
really interesting, and that's
Mhm.
part of what I've been repeating to myself, this
Right.
notion of making a choice, saying yes. And I wonder, are there certain phrases or certain uh, choices or things you hold on to that are like your lifeline, if you will, when you need it, that you repeat to yourself?
It's changed over the years. For a long time, I wasn't using the attunements practically in a daily way. And my problem with it was that it was coming through me. That was always my problem with the channeling, the energy I could trust. It's not that I discounted the work. I think Helen Schuckman said this, and the woman who channeled Course in Miracles said, I don't believe it, but I know it's true. I totally get that experience of it. The claim, I know who I am, which is one of the guide's claims, is a really useful one because you're knowing who you are beyond the identity that's been procured, or the idea of self that operates through the reflection of others' decisions and who I should be in the world. The divine self, or the monad, they call it, or the Christ within, they call it sometimes, always knows who it is and is actually operating without fear. Fear doesn't operate at that level, nor does the idea of personal history as we've utilized it. When you begin to move to that level, you can actually begin to move beyond all the historical data. But like, I'm going to ask if there is something that I use in a daily way. Yeah, I'm allowed to trust this process. I'm allowed to be in this process. I'm also allowed to not understand it while it's happening. You know, it's giving myself the permission to be as I am without the judgment that I would probably like to employ. Um, but I don't have magic words. I do have the attunements. The one that's in the newest book and the one that they've channeled since the one you just read is my favorite of all of them, and it's a very simple one. And again, it's invoked by the divine self. I am in God, I am of God, I am with God. Those three claims, they say, hold all the other claims and all of the other teachings within them. And that you claim that from the level of alignment of the upper room, because the aspect of self that is ennobled there, that says, I have come, I am here, I have arrived, is the aspect of self that knows that to be true. And again, that comes with a real physical experience. In this case, the energy around you begins to shift. When we do this in workshops, and there's 100 people doing it, you literally feel the whole room begin to escalate beyond the individual energetic field, but you're really claiming the collective environment. I am in God, which means like I'm in the sea of God, and God is the sea, and I can't be outside of that, even when I think I'm not there.
All right, Paul, I'm gonna go straight to the heart of the matter, if that's okay, and it's a little
Right.
confessional here, but here you and I were both. I'm in my 60s, you're in your 60s, yeah? And, so much to be for me, I'm speaking for myself now, I have so much to be grateful for in
Uh-huh.
my life, and I, love the porousness I have to the kind of attunements that come through you and my experience in reading Divine Union. I mean, I just love that feeling that I can be in that wavelength.
Uh-huh.
And and there's a part of me that still hasn't come along for the ride, that's still holding out, and I feel impatient. And I feel, and I'm a little frustrated, to be honest. And yes, in God, of God, with God, a big portion of me, yes. And then some part that still, even though I'm in my 60s and I've been at this for a
You,
long time, soaking in various ways in this vibrational attunement with different teachers
yeah.
and teachings, still holding out somewhere. So I don't know. And so I'm wondering what you or these terrific intelligences have to say to people like me, because I don't think it's just me.
No, I'm there with you in some ways still. I really am. And I've maintained a level of skepticism since the beginning. I trust the guides and what they teach. They're smarter than I am. I don't care how smart I may be. I don't think I'm capable of closing my eyes and delivering 13 books in front of an audience of people, that don't need editing. I mean, there's no editing. It's nuts. Let me tune into you, though, and I'm going to see what I hear from you. Would you just say your name for me so I can use that as a
Sure.
coordinate?
Tami Simon.
Let me see what I get. You come through saying, if I do this, what am I giving up? It's really mistrustful. It's like, if I order this great $1,000 dinner on the menu, are you going to make me wash the dishes in the kitchen? It's a lack of trust. And I go, well, why? And I hear, well, because I've been hurt before. It's a fear of betrayal. I don't want to trust if I can't trust. And there's great sadness with this with you, and also a kind of resolve. I keep wanting to, do this, which is my symbol for not self-protection as much as being resolute, but I don't want it. I keep trying to open my arms up. So the answer to this for you, I hear, is, what if there was no cost for this? What if nothing is being asked of you except what you can give? What if the authority that you've earned is still present, but in an altered state? What if the aspect of you that knows higher is beginning to direct and at the same time care for or comfort the aspect of self that feels a little bit cautious, scared, really? It's more fear. So why fear? The fear, funnily enough, has to do with almost being too vulnerable, too open. Like, I feel like if I walk into the ocean too far, a wave is going to come and knock me flat on my ass, and I'm going to find myself out at sea with not knowing what I can grab onto for support. And when I tune into you, you say, I don't want this anymore. It's quite emotional. Most of it, by the way, gets caught in your throat. Like, it's in my throat. I just want to expel it. And then you say, if I could trust God, would I? And then they point to me. So that's probably my issue. Yes, too, in a funny way. Accurate. I just said this to you. The young lady is willing, you are not, which is me. So what's the difference here? The young lady knows that this is her only recourse at this time.
That's true.
I have to give myself permission. That's all. That's all. That's all. From my end, they say still have a stake of some kind in the idea of being harmed by being visible and trusting, which is my old history. Accurate. They're saying accurate. And I do hear you'll both work through it in your own ways. You have the right to it. That's the big deal. Nobody's telling you no, but you. And the moment you say yes to it, I hear you're going to be so surprised. Whenever the jaw drops, that's like the aha moment. Like, oh my God, it's happening. But it's a little as if the ice that you have collected around you, which is protective, just begins to fall away in sheets. And I think the kind of freedom that you're going to experience yourself in is going to really be, I'm going to say, revelatory, because without that kind of sheet of ice covering perception, then you understand this claim that the guides teach, behold, I make all things new, which is you're seeing things as they truly are, as of source beyond all of the restrictions that we have imposed. That's what I get.
And I'm grateful for the very personalized
Mhm,
instruction, and I wanna
mhm,
make sure that I'm bringing this invitation to the people who are tuning in and to this time that
mhm.
we're in.
Good. So how does everybody begin to what? Trust?
Yeah, open our hearts and trust and let go of our defendedness against divine union.
Let me go to them. Know that it is expressed even when it does not appear as present. It's configured. It is configured even in the ash of the fire. The divine is present in the fire. The divine is present in the fire, and the structure was in the structure that was the fire, and now the ash, and now the ash. When you understand the very simple idea that the source of all things must, underline must, be present in, of, and with all things, you begin to release the need to decide and to decree what is of source and what cannot be. The temptation to decide what cannot be or should not be of, in, or with source must be replaced by the awareness that the source of all things, which doesn't mean the intention behind an act or a thing, is God, but the source of the thing itself, what creates the thing as present in form, is source. When you begin to trust, then underline the word trust, that the source of all things is present even when it appears obscured or denied or refuted, you will actually have the ability to reclaim what you see in the light. Now, understand what this means. You perceive the clouds, you forget that the sun is behind the clouds. When you know or realize the sun behind the clouds will indeed disperse. When you understand that the clouds themselves are also an expression of source, you will actually have a different relationship with the idea of cloud. To understand that the temptation in these times, collective times, is to refute divine action, is to deny the presence of God amidst the chaos, would be to miss the opportunity to realize, which means know, that the source of the chaos is the magnitude of change that humanity is now facing. Because the time has come for humanity to re-know itself beyond separation. The claims of separation that you perceive around you, depicted in all ways, must be understood as evidential of change, but the action that propels the change is still present in a high way. To re-know what you see in source or of source is to re-know the landscape. The common field that you operate in is a landscape. You all do need to understand that the energetic fields that you hold are in co-resonance or alignment with everything that you see. This does not mean that you created these things personally. It does mean that there is an aspect of each of you that is confirming the evidence of what you see. To confirm the evidence of what you see is, in fact, to concretize it and make it so. To re-know a thing in source is to reclaim the thing outside of the field of separation that you have accrued, period. And that was dense. Sorry, that was a dense answer, but that's what they gave you.
Well, and they started talking about this time that we're in, which I also did want to talk to the guides about because I think a lot of us, and I'm really sensing this. I mean,
Mhm.
I've had more mediums on this show, Insights at the Edge, in the last 6 months than I had in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's something changing in
Mhm.
terms of our acceptance of multidimensional intelligence. Paul, this is your time. Need I
Mhm.
say, I can sense that, and other people I've been talking to. And it does seem like there's some kind of restructuring
Yeah,
happening at this time and a new level of openness as
yeah.
well.
Well, I've been hearing that since the beginning of all this. They said in 2009 with the first book that humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. and that everything that's been created in fear needs to be reknown in a higher way. And the examples they've used have been things like, well, there's nothing wrong with a bank. It has a purpose. But if the cement that holds the building of the bank together is made of fear, the building itself may not last. The structures may not last. In 2000, maybe it was 2019, they came through, and it was on a live broadcast of something. There's a big thing coming. It's going to hit New York. Please, Paul, be prepared. I was like, I don't want to be in New York for another disaster. I lived downtown during 9/11. I was there during Yale. I said, no more. I said, please let me be someplace pretty and elsewhere. And this happened. And I actually was in Costa Rica when COVID locked down New York so much so that I couldn't get back to New York City, which is where I lived then. And they began saying during that whole period to be prepared for a radical change in all structures. And at the time, I thought it was nuts. They said economic structures, medical structures, educational structures. I thought, what the hell's going to happen with education? Who's going to mess with that? I was an academic, the things that we thought were entrenched and would never be changed. They say it may not be, they used to say the mailbox may not be on your corner to drop the mail in next month. And in New York, they actually did take away mailboxes in certain neighborhoods at a period of time. So people couldn't mail things in. So they've been on it in this way, but they've always spoken to it as opportunity. And they've also said, and I struggle with this, one of their books was called The Book of Truth. And it was a tough book as far as they go. They're all very different, and they're all vibrational, tonal experiences for the reader. But in that book, they say, in truth, a lie will not be held. In the energy of truth, a lie will not be held. Right before the Trump-Clinton election years ago, I was channeling in someplace. It was like Madison, some weird place. And they said, get ready, because your idea of choice is I will have the cream and not the milk in my coffee. What's about to happen is the table holding the milk and the cream is going to be turned over. And what you think is choice is going to be something very, very different. And so they've kind of been on this, but they've spoken to it as opportunity, finally opportunity, because they say, and they have said, that we have the means now for mass extinction. We didn't used to have that. And we know that at a higher level, and we're refusing that at a higher level. So humanity, they say, as a whole, the idea of collective soul, humanity has decided at a higher level to move beyond the old or move to the next level of vibration. My guides don't talk about dimensions per se. I failed science. I hear physicists come to my stuff and say, oh, you're explaining this concept in physics. I don't really know that. But I do kind of know when they talk about the upper room, they're talking about a shift in vibration, which allows us to move into coherence with a different way of being in reality that actually forces or allows for the release of the old stuff that hasn't been working quite so well.
I've been talking with Paul Selig. He's the author of a book here in 2026 that's being released called Divine Union. What's coming after Divine Union? It sounds like you're already working on it, Paul.
I'm already. I tour in the summer and I do a bunch of like 5-day events in a row. And the guides have taken to utilizing those longer retreats to deliver books because they have the same students in a room for a period of time and they can build a chapter. So they'll get a whole book done over, 2 months of lectures. 21 days, I think, was the last book of lectures. They're calling it right now the upper room, and they're talking about how to maintain the vibration of that level of alignment. It's the teaching of I am in God, I am of God, and I am with God. And the book that you just read, in some ways, I feel like is a clean precursor to it. I just read the book you read a few weeks ago when I did the audiobooks, and I went, wow, this is pretty smart. I'm always surprised when I read them. Sometimes I don't want to hear their voices anymore. But that's what they're teaching now. They're teaching union in its extraordinary ways that they say it can be realized by us while we maintain form.
I want to say, Paul, I think you are a very remarkable workhorse for the upper room. You really are. You're a human workhorse. I'm impressed.
Thank you for that. It beats laying bricks. I will say that. And, the fact that, as I said, I'm trying to write my own book for the first time,
Oh,
now.
interesting.
Yeah. But, delivering a book that I don't have to proofread or edit, because I don't, there's no editing. Somebody can correct the typos in the manuscript, is such a relief. I feel so blessed. And if it helps people, I'm even happier, because the books, I don't know if they're for me. I think I'm part of the audience, but certainly not the whole one.
And I want to end on this note: in God, of God, and with God. For me, that's a really beautiful takeaway gift. Could you end by taking us there, the experience in, of, and with, as a signature, vibrational signature that we can feel and keep with us?
Can I do something? Did you ask me to do something with that?
You or the guides, I don't care, but I want to leave our listeners
Sure.
with that signature.
They're saying, let's go to the attunement. So, yes, they're starting here. They're saying this: I am in the upper room. I have come, I have come, I have come. Behold, I make all things new. It will be so. God is, God is, God is. I am in God. You can say this. I am of God. I am with God. And they're saying blessings to each of you.
And blessings to you, Paul Selig. I hope I get to meet you in person sometime and give you a big hug.
Thank
What
you for
a
that.
great workhorse you are. Thank you so very, very much. Thanks, friends, for being with us.